So welcome everyone to this Polyphony gathering with our special guest, Karen Marrolli, who is the Director of Music Ministries at Central United Methodist Church in Albuquerque, New Mexico. She previously served as Director. Let me ask everyone to mute themselves. I'm kind of getting feedback here. She previously served as Director of Music Ministries at Trussville, First United Methodist Church in Trussville, Alabama, as Director of Choral Music Ministries at the United Church of Santa Fe, and as the Artistic Director of the Zia Singers, the Cantu Spiritus Chamber Choir, and the Santa Fe Men's Camerata. She holds a DMA degree in Choral Conducting from Louisiana State University, where she studied choral conducting with Dr. Kenneth Fulton, and she earned her BM in Music Theory and Composition and her MM in Choral Conducting and Sacred Music from Westminster Choir College before relocating to Charleston, South Carolina, where she lived for 7 years prior to pursuing doctoral studies. And there's so much more to share about Karen, but I'm going to allow us to learn that as we go through this interview time. Before we really get started with the interview, just share during these days of COVID that we're still in, though we're finding a new normal slowly here. Tell us how things are going for you in Albuquerque, Karen, and just let us get to know, because you are among one of us in doing the daily grind of music ministry as well.
Oh, yes. So hi, everybody. Yeah, Albuquerque, it's funny, New Mexico has fared generally well, I think, in the pandemic. We're having a little bit of a heyday now, and we're not really sure why. But anyway, so we're still being very, very cautious. And we were just having this conversation. We're singing together, but we're all singing masked. The congregation is masked. We are doing limited congregational singing, where I just have them do maybe like a verse of a couple hymns throughout the service, and really cut down on congregational responses, I think, finally, and all of that kind of stuff. So we're doing things, but we're kind of trying to do them in a cautious way. Shorter rehearsals. We were also discussing that, and I feel the same thing, that it takes a little bit longer to get things done, and to get things done well, like you would want to do for worship, which is not totally unexpected. I think that I expect, and I really kind of tried to lead them through doing very simple things to get them used to singing. Because one of the concerns when we were meeting over Zoom weekly during the real lockdown was that people felt like they were losing their voices, kind of thing. So I really kind of eased them into it. So we're doing a couple of harder anthems over the next, we did one that was unfamiliar. We're doing the Brandon Boyd, I'll Fly Away, which is a real sort of barn burner if you're looking for something to challenge your choir. And then we're doing simpler things going into Advent, things that they know and can handle, because they've now gone through that, this more rigorous thing. So it seems to be working well, and they're singing well, and I'm really proud of them for what they're doing. So, but that's kind of where we are.
Mm-hmm. Good. Tell us about your early years. I think that everyone would find this interesting, your early years in your musical journey, how it began, specifically, how that journey led to composing.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was always, I always loved music. I've said this a couple times in interviews, but my mother always likes to say that I was raised on kind of a weird combination of country gospel, like bluegrass, and the Beatles. So, I'm not really sure what proper musicians are supposed to, do or write like or whatnot. It took till college for me to get into that sort of arena. But always interested in music, did choir in middle school when it was finally offered, and that kind of stuff. I wrote my first song when I was like 12 or 13. I think I was 12 when I did it, when I started writing, taught myself to play the piano, that kind of stuff, and eventually got lessons. And then did end up going to Westminster, as was mentioned in the biography, and got my Bachelor of Music there. And the journey there is that my mother really did not want me to major in music at all, for all the reasons that you might expect. So I was able to go to Westminster as a Bachelor of Arts. That was my declared major, Bachelor of Arts in Music, because they had that when I started. And then I switched in my second year to Bachelor of Music and Music Composition. And that was not met with the best reaction, I don't think, at home. But that's what I ended up doing, and staying there for sacred music and for conducting. And then, took some time. As was mentioned, I went to South Carolina, to Charleston, because the Westminster Choir was, up until very recently, the sort of choir in residence at the Spoleto Festival USA. So I sort of got that relationship and that feel for Charleston, and just decided I wanted to move there. So I ended up moving there and working both in sort of college, higher ed, admin, residence life, and in music, sort of simultaneously. I ended up teaching for a few years in a couple of high schools, and had that experience, which, as you all probably know, is very helpful, not only to, if you have a youth choir in your church, but also in dealing with your 65-year-old youth, because it's all the same. It's the same thing. And then ended up getting my doctorate from there. So it was sort of a winding path, I guess, to get into full-time doing music. But yeah, that's a little bit of the early backstory, at least.
Yeah. We've mentioned before recording this session together, as we were gathering this morning, that several of us have sung some of your anthems. I'd mentioned that we sang "I Sought your setting, I Sought the Lord" on the last Sunday. We worshiped in person back in March 2020, March 8th, 2020, unknowingly, and during that season of Lent. And we've also did your selection, "Like a Mighty Wind," in virtual rehearsals and virtual worship during the when we were still mostly unvaccinated, and in the spring, mid-spring, late spring. We've done your "Let Us Come," which I think may be your highest selling piece with Morningstar Publishers. And we're looking forward to doing your "Come Before the Table" when we resume Lord's Supper, actually gathering at the table together, pew by pew, hopefully sometime in next year. Many of your anthems, like the ones we've done here at Kirkwood Baptist and other churches here represented in this group of music ministers, are your original text, which is not common anymore. And some can be quite deep and profound, actually. And
only some of them, though.
And you're right.
I love that.
What's that?
Only some of them, though. The rest of them are just a wash.
But they're theologically grounded. They are theologically grounded. They're not, because there's certainly some anthems, as we're all probably taught, you should read the text first before you even listen to the music, play the anthem, read the text to know if it's even worth singing. And your texts are worth singing, in my opinion, and judgment. And do you start with the text in mind or the music? That's a question I think all of us might have here.
So, it really just depends on the situation. Sometimes, and so now I've started doing some commissions. So sometimes the person who's commissioning has an idea of what they want the text to be, or at least the scripture. So in that case, I certainly start with the text. Also, oftentimes, because I'm kind of boots on the ground, because I found myself going this route of, another thing that I didn't mention is generally when you go that route, that educational route of doing like the master's to the doctorate, you're supposed to be going to teach in a university. And I thought that that's what I was going to do until I was in Louisiana working with my church choir, Ingleside Methodist Church, just a small little church that had burned down, and they needed somebody to come love on them and, be that person. And so that was really kind of when I said, I really feel like this is kind of who I am, and use the betterment that you get from the doctorate to kind of put it into sacred music. So I'm very much boots on the ground. And have had a wide variety of different kinds of choirs as far as what I'm composing. So I'm composing for that specific scenario and from within it. So that really informs how I go about writing a piece as well. So like, for example, with certain Sundays where you have a text that that's the gospel, or that's what's being preached on, writing an anthem that is suitable for that. And also sometimes, because I've been able to work with these folks that don't necessarily preach the garden variety sermon, that it might not, things that are in your standard repertoire might not really cut it, or might not be the exact amplification of the sermon that you want, which is really important to me, working in that they kind of work together. So that can really inform with starting with the text and then having the music come after that. The example that I always use is Great Creator is another piece of mine, which you may have seen, but that was written for a pastor in Alabama, in Trussville, Alabama, who was preaching on the Isaiah text of the wolf will lie down with the lamb, and everyone will get along, and puppies and rainbows and all of this stuff. And so the title of his sermon was going to be Great When, like we're waiting for this to happen. So that's how that Great Creator text came about, because he was taking a little bit of a different route. So that idea that we are restless and impatient waiting for this to happen, and maybe we should try to help take part in that happening. So that creates the text, and then the music comes after that. Now, the flip side is sometimes I'm just messing around and I come up with music, come up with a melody, come up with a harmonic structure, and then the text fills in to round that out, I guess. So it can happen both ways, really. And it just kind of depends on the situation of what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So some of your text and music happens almost simultaneously.
Yeah. So so sometimes it really does come, or sometimes it's a ping pong. Like I might have an idea, like I really want to write about this particular text or this particular idea, and I might even just have a phrase of something, and then the music will come along. Either I'll hear something, which is creepy, or I'll play something, and then I'll come back to fill out the text. So it can be kind of a ping pong, a simultaneous, or really a complete text that happens, and then I set the text, like I'd be setting someone else's poem. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's no one way.
Right. It sounds like you're open to how the Spirit is guiding you. It sounds like the Spirit is guiding you in the process, and you're just putting yourself up. You don't have a particular regimen.
Rigid. Yeah, no, there is nothing about me that is regimen. Oh no. So many times people ask me, what was your process for? Process? What are you talking about? But yeah, I think that's exactly it. And I am very much somebody who believes in the idea of kind of co-creator kind of thing. Like I am a vehicle for which this stuff happens. And I have some theory knowledge that may help organize it. But really I'm kind of almost taking dictation, or I hear things and I write them down, so that there is that kind of Holy Spirit connection, I think, of being able to create something that will hopefully do some good in the world, I guess. And I'm very much about not trying to force or put schooling or learnedness on something to force it to happen. Sometimes that can be very useful if you know that you need a change or a contrast, or with just very minimal things. But for the most part, if I'm not hearing it, it's probably not right. So I just need to go chill out and take a walk, or walk away. And then oftentimes it will kind of correct itself in my head. So I'm not much for imposing myself on something. There isn't, at least in my case, much good to doing that. I know some other people work very methodically, and the guy that I wrote my dissertation on, Michael McGlynn, would probably hate that statement, because some people just write every single day, and he's one of those kinds of folks. And I know other folks like this, where you are creating, you are making it happen, and I am waiting for it to happen and then relaying what I've heard, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, but composition's just part of who you are.
Yeah.
In music
Mm-hmm.
ministry. I mean, you have many other tasks at hand each day.
I do.
And you also live in a place, one of my favorite places is New Mexico. I mean, you live in a beautiful place that has its own beauty to it, very unlike living on the East Coast in Charleston. It's a totally different environment, but it's big skies, and I don't know, it just feels like you're in a place that you can be inspired a lot in your daily life, going on a walk, as you say. Yeah.
Yeah, and that finds its way into the text too, I think, a lot, that kind of desert faith. Yeah.
Like what, Karen? Do you have an example?
Well, I mean, Rivers of Living Water is one that I think that you mentioned, but like that was actually written, and I know some of you are, and I love the Southeast. I was fascinated with the Southeast because I grew up in New Jersey. And so, that area of the country has its own like beauty, and very obvious beauty, and all of that kind of stuff. But then I moved away and went into the Southwest, and it's a completely different, as we mentioned, kind of a thing. And then it ended up moving back to the Southeast, and realized, I guess I had been sort of, I don't know, taken with the desert. But actually that Rivers of Living Water text and the feeling of it and the ethos, I think is a little bit homesick, from moving away from New Mexico and being back into so it very much has those elements, both in the music, obviously, and some of the tunes that I chose to quote in the instrumental parts, but also in the text, that text of Longing for Water. I wrote a desert mass that isn't published, that I'm part of the story. And I love having any story where it starts with, I got permission from a medicine man to use. But I'm very sort of trepidatious, is that a word, of taking things like out of native culture, and then that aren't already out in the open necessarily, and then using them to better. I just don't think that's right. But it actually uses like Navajo prayers, and all of the text I wrote myself is very inspired by the desert and all of that kind of stuff. So that's a huge example. But it finds its way in little chunks, I think, everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah, in pieces here and there, in other. Yeah. This group, I'm not sure how many. I mean, RG for sure, I would suspect, but there was at a time, the property was sold, a space where several in this cohort probably went for conferences, Glorieta, New Mexico.
Yes. Oh, yeah. It was sold.
I got to go a few times as a college student and young adult in ministry, first in ministry, and
Mhm.
a beautiful space to go to in generally June or early July to worship together and retreat. And so, yeah, I'm speaking for myself, a little jealous of what you get, the surroundings you get to experience, because it is a beautiful place. And the culture, yeah, it's a totally different culture there.
It is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like you're speaking of, with being able to um, borrow and responsibly take pieces of their culture, and I'm glad you share how you take that. You don't do that lightly, that you're
No.
and how you use those parts of Navajo culture and etc. to in your music. Um, so it, we also see that you have a strong interest in Irish folk song too, and you capture some of that feel of this in your original writing, as well as the use of solo instrument in a folk-like feel, which is a prominent thing in some of your works. Um, Share with us about that. What is it that particular kind of music that appeals to you, um, and compels you to compose it?
So I think part of it is just in my DNA, because that's part of my heritage. I think that I really got exposed to a lot of the tunes, the reels and the jigs and all of that kind of stuff in Charleston, because I was working with someone who is not only Robert Taylor is not only the director of choral activities at the College of Charleston, but he and his wife have a festival that is all based on Celtic music and the relationship between Celtic folk music and classical music, and that they're not necessarily that folk music and classical music aren't at odds at all. So she actually has his wife, Mary Taylor, has this cohort of little fiddlers from littles to maybe through high school. And they do all these wonderful tunes, Drowsy Maggie and Julie Delaney and all of these sorts of things. So being in that, I think I really got exposed from being around that to all of that different sound, I guess. So, and there's something about it that's almost a little bit, depending on how you do it, it's not necessarily genteel music, it's stuff that you would sit around and listen to in bars and pubs and all of that kind of stuff. So I'm fascinated with the idea of taking that and putting it with like the church anthem. It's almost sort of Renaissance-y, like, I'm sorry, everybody in the world is like emailing me right now, and one of them is Morning Star. It's making
Maybe
noise.
you should take that one and we should hit pause.
That's okay. But anyway, so there's almost sort of like if it gets into a groove, there's almost sort of like a Celtic or like a rock and roll kind of feel to it too, which always appeals to me. So I like the juxtaposition of putting those elements together. Yeah.
Yeah. So have you written in the last 18 months during this season that we've been in together, have you had more opportunities to write? Have you been more, more time available, or seemingly more available? I would at least in the early days of the pandemic, or the pandemic itself, things.
Yeah, well, the early days were.
Pardon me?
The early days were sort of, speaking of wandering in the desert, very sort of, you just didn't know kind of what to do with yourself. I've been lucky in that I've had several commissions over the past, I guess, 18 months and things like that to work on. One of them was really written with the idea in mind that the gentleman would have to do a virtual choir. So it's interesting that the pandemic has influenced, at least in my case, and I'm sure I'm not the only person, what you write, and the level of what you write, or is it written so that it could be done in various ways that are not normal? That kind of stuff. And I know there are pieces that have been written so that people could do them on Zoom, taking advantage of the lag, that kind of stuff. So I did this particular piece thinking that it would be a virtual choir. So making sure to keep it to two voices, or two voice parts with an optional third and fourth voice part, making things very flexible and accessible, I guess. So that was one example of something that I wrote. He ended up finally being able to do it, I think, last spring. Wasn't able to get the virtual choir aspect of it together, which is understandable. I've been writing things that text-wise, I think, are a reaction to the time. And also even there are some things coming out, they're already solos, and there are some things they're coming out as very flexible, either essay or SAB, or two-part and SAB kinds of things, that I initially wrote because in the early days of the pandemic, there were 5 of us permitted in the sanctuary or in the building to accomplish a live stream. So I was doing my singer-songwriter, sitting at the piano, Joni Mitchell, and playing and singing in a church setting. So I wrote things like Be Still, was one of those ones that I wrote, if you've seen that one, roaming around as a solo, to be able to sing, that catered to my specific piano skills. And it's been expanded. So it's, I like we're not always able to do it, I think, as a species, because it's hard, but these really hard traumatic things that we go through that you can turn into a strength. This has been a time that we have been able to do that and had opportunities to do that, I think. There's another piece that's coming out. It's not necessarily a church piece, but it very much could be done in a church. And I actually did it as a solo at one point, called Hope Waits, that should, by the end of the month, kind of be available on the ECS, on the Morningstar page. And that was very much written out of this idea that hope is a choice that we can make. It's just waiting for us to make it, and standing by on the sidelines while we're mourning and weeping. So, that influence of the pandemic too, I think, on the texts and what was being written. Yeah. So there's been a lot of that in the past 18, 20 months, 20 years, however long this has been. Yeah.
That's great, Karen. I want to open up the time for others to ask questions they may have, or comments, feedback, follow up on something that Karen has shared.
So I'd like to know, Karen, I mean, I've seen your some of your pieces at Morningstar, or I've encountered them in a conference or so somewhere, and I've heard them, but I've never selected any to introduce to my choir. I'm sort of coming back from a little bit of a sabbatical anyway, so I haven't been, and then the pandemic came. So let's say if I were going to introduce some of your music to my choir, what would be 2 or 3 that you would recommend that I look at, that would be good ones to kind of introduce you to?
I think it kind of depends on your choir and what you want to get out of it too. But like this I Sought the Lord, that Kyle mentioned, is obviously, that text is pre-existing, but it was written specifically in a crunch to try to get something that the choir could do quickly. So depending on the choir, a choir that isn't necessarily I guess, really super quick at doing things, they would still be able to do it easily. But if your choir is, a little bit more like mine, like they just picked it up and ate it for lunch, so that I knew that they'd be able to do it in 2 weeks, kind of a thing. So that one is really, you know, accessible. I think Like a Mighty Wind might be my favorite, because of the, I like the text, and the nature of the text and the motive that runs throughout. It's a little bit more challenging, but I don't think it's too challenging, Kyle.
No.
You said it's got, you know, little section in the middle that's 4-part and a little crunchy, but you know, it gives them a good challenge. So I mean, those are 2 kinds of things that I think would be good things that I would recommend. Come Before the Table, a couple of people have mentioned. That one's a whole different vibe. I mean, you know, it has this sort of a world music kind of a feel to it. And a little bit more springy, which is not something that I always feel like I do well. So I like that one because it's different.
Do you write a cappella?
Sometimes. Actually, Come Before the Table, it can be done a cappella with a drum. So it's like, if that's something that you're going for, that would be a good choice. And you know, I would also say, I also really like, it's a little bit older, but To Dust is a really Ash Wednesday kind of a piece. That's one that people really like, but the very beginning of it can be done a cappella. And it's got those kind of close harmonies, but hopefully written in a way that makes it easier and not hard, you know, that makes sense. It's all in the way you kind of approach those things. But that's an Ash Wednesday piece that's all about kind of rebirth at that time. So there's a couple good ones.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I will piggyback on that, because like I said, I sought the Lord, and I just wanted to, without knowing your story and without knowing that you were a boots to the ground person, I would have assumed that after going through that piece, because when I went through it, I was like, first, it's accessible, but not everything that's accessible is beautiful, and not everything that is beautiful is accessible, but this was both. And it's almost like I said, I was thinking, okay, well, she lives in real life. This is actually doable. And especially for my choir, we still have a couple members that, because of major health concerns, cannot even return to choir. So I've got some big holes. The age of my choir, we do have some, 70, 75-year-old youth, like you said.
Oh yeah.
That I'm dealing with, and just those voices coming after so many months of not even using them. We've got some fragile instruments to deal with, so I appreciated it how, for instance, the tenors aren't asked to sing something way out of their range. Everything was just right in a sweet spot, and it was something that we could do with people coming in and out of rehearsals and things. It didn't take a lot of preparation, but yet they still felt like they were presenting something beautiful and worthwhile during the service. So that was one thing I had appreciated that. So
yeah,
thank you.
That's really great. Yeah. And that is very much a thing, because that's what I found, and I didn't find this really kind of came to a head, I think, when I was doing my, I want to say first, after my doctorate at least, church choir in Santa Fe, at the United Church of Santa Fe, because it was a small choir, and they were smart and capable and all of that kind of stuff. But there was a lot of that in and out kind of thing. And I just kept finding that there were things or texts or ideas that maybe even there was a setting for, but it wasn't realistic, for us to be able to do in real life, as you said, in choir, in the 2 to 3 rehearsals. If you have 2 months to work on it, you can. So writing out of that necessity, like you said, that not everything that is beautiful is necessarily accessible, so I'm always trying to make things that are accessible for the choir, but that have a musical value. So that, it's kind of straddles that line. And that's some of the feedback that I get. So I really appreciate that when people tell me that, because that's really, really what I want to try to do.
All right. Well, I don't want to.
I do have. I'm sorry, I had to leave. We've had a debit card fraud I had to take care of. But anyway,
Hey,
Oh,
Very minor.
gross.
I think what they try and do is put a very low thing to see if the card works before they do a big one, and it got caught. So anyway,
Hmm.
we're good. Karen, do you ever travel to do composer weekends with other choirs?
I have not yet. I would love to. I've done a thing locally with my sister church over here in Albuquerque. Just kind of came in and conducted some pieces. So that's something that I've always wanted to do, but haven't been able to do it yet.
Okay.
It's kind of funny too, because people have to get to know who you are, and they were just, I think, starting to get to know who I was. Very strange. We did that conference in Charleston for sacred music, and I was like, oh, this is cool. And then we had a pandemic.
Right.
Right when people were like, oh, that's you. Are you her? I like that. Are you her? I said, usually I am, I think. I don't. And so it was just kind of starting, and then so there hasn't been a lot of knowledge of me or opportunity, but yeah, those are types of things that I would love to do.
Well, this church has done this before I got here. It has a long history of it. But not all composers are conductors. So, I would
true.
love someone who is a composer and a conductor to come work with our choir and spend a weekend. And so if I could get your contact information, then at some point in the next couple of years, I'd like to explore that with you if we could.
Yeah, that'd be great.
mhm. Well, if there's not any more questions, I want to don't want to speak too soon, but I will just say that I'm glad that we could have this time together. Karen, I meant to say to everyone that Karen's on a Mountain Standard Time, so she really had to make a sacrifice here on Thursday morning, which probably is your long day because you probably have rehearsal this evening. If you didn't have it,
No, I had it last night.
well, then it was still an early day.
No, today is COVID booster day.
Oh, good for you.
Woohoo!
Yeah. Well, hope that goes well for you, and you can have a nice weekend and not be
Yeah, well, I figured I'd give myself some time.
right. Wise move. Well, thank you for sharing this time with us, especially early start of the day for you. And I'm glad that we could connect with you and get to know you. And Aaron's so right. I agree with Aaron that had a sense of who you are by your music. Yeah, that's a boots on the ground. It's a perfect expression to sum it up. So thank you for your ministry of music, sharing your ministry of music with all of us that you do there in Albuquerque. And I just want to say that next time we're together is in 2 weeks with our last meeting before the end of the year with Terry Johnson. And I thought Terry was one of the first voices that spoke to this gathering, one of the first persons when we started these Zoom meetings back in 2019. And now that we're at this point in the pandemic, I thought he would have some more ideas and encouragement to share with us. That'll be in 2 weeks. And look for more details about Polyphony Gathering in February in just outside Atlanta at Smoke Rise Baptist. Am I saying that right? Yeah. It would be wonderful to see all of you in person if you could make that happen in your schedules.
Can I ask a quick question? Is there a plan to do a hotel nearby with everybody that, in one place or not?
Could you say that one more time? Becky, I think I'm getting feedback from you, by the way. I'm not sure. Go ahead, Chip.
Yeah, is there a plan to get together like everybody stay at a hotel, same hotel, or are we kind of on our own for lodging?
That's a good
that.
question. I need to follow up with Doug that's doing all
Yeah.
that work and planning with others. I haven't been, that's a good question. Let me check on that.
Great, thank you.
Mhm. Any other questions or thoughts? I hope everyone has a wonderful and healthy end of this year and Advent season. And Karen, thank you for sharing your time with us this morning and giving us a lot of insight into who you are and how you write. It's been really, it just really is good to, connect with composers and not just with their music, but to connect with them this way. So thank you so much. And I had written a benediction last month that I was just kind of inspired by, and Karen said something in her interview about being a co-creator that made me go back and find that to share with us today as we close. Friends, beloved, may the creator of all, who calls you to be co-creators in a new creation on this earth, empower you to create after the way and pattern of Jesus and in the ever dancing of the Spirit. And may the blessing and love of God, our Maker, Savior, and Sustainer, be with you in your work and in your homes this day and forevermore. Amen. Thank you all. Thank you, Karen.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.